lives. He's a longtime consumer advocate, a former presidential candidate. Please give it up for Ralph Nader.
Thank you, Dr. Flowers, also for your great work on single payer, full Medicare for all. Everybody in, nobody out. Well, Kevin Zeese called this effort a movement of leaders, and that's what you all should aspire to. There's a lot of argument why it should be a movement of leaders. First of all, you won't be dependent on others. You'll create your own ideas, your own space, your own strategies, your own tactics. I just heard on the radio today that there's Occupy Prescott or Arizona, all the way to Occupy Hartford, Connecticut. Yeah. And there's a wonderful spontaneity about this. I've often said, half of democracy is showing up, but I now have to modify it because it's really half of democracy showing up and staying. Yeah. Staying. Not just a one-day event like Washington is famous for, weekend rallies, a few hours, and you leave, and Congress comes back. Congress is not here when you're here, and Congress is here when you're not here. So you're staying. You're staying. That's very important to spread all over the country. Staying. Staying is another word for stamina. It's another word for seriousness. And it's another word to tell the power structure that you're not going away. Yeah. Just add it up. For over 2 weeks now, your efforts, Occupy Wall Street and all the other Occupies, have reached the national media. Okay? So, and I don't think more than 100,000 people have yet showed up everywhere. And there are hundreds of thousands, tens of millions ready to show up everywhere. Yeah. Because this is a majoritarian movement. There's no doubt about that. Poll after poll shows over 80 to 90% of the people think our country's going into the wrong direction. Well, who's pushing it in the wrong direction? The same people who are ruling this country are driving this country into the ground. So, pass it along. Over 75% of the people think corporations, big corporations, have too much control over their lives. That's a majoritarian position. Over 80% of the people want full Medicare for all. That's a majoritarian position. Over 75 to 80% of the people think there's too much power in too few hands, making decisions by the few for the many. Over 65% of the people think that globalization is costing him jobs. Over 80% of the people like the following adjectives because they describe what's going on. Crony capitalism. Corporate capitalism. Casino, Wall Street capitalism. And globalized capitalism. What do they signify? They signify an abandonment of our country. These U.S. corporations were born in the U.S., chartered in the U.S., They rose to profit on the backs of American workers. They went to Washington to be bailed out by American taxpayers. When they got in trouble overseas, they called on the U.S. Marines to save them decade after decade. And what's their response to the American people? Is it gratitude? No way. Their response is, we're out of here with your jobs and your industries to fascist and communist regimes overseas who know how to keep their workers in their repressed place. So there's no patriotism by these corporations. There's no allegiance to this country other than to control it or ship its jobs overseas. And that's the argument. The argument is that these corporations who have been coddled, who've been given tax breaks, who've been deregulated without law and order, who have not been prosecuted for their Wall Street crimes that collapse the economy on the backs of American workers, taxpayers, and investors, they have no allegiance to our country. That's why the phrase occupy is very important, because they've taken the country from us, and we're going to reoccupy it and run it for the people of this country. If I may make a few suggestions. Number one, it's interesting the way the Occupy movement has developed, isn't it? See, when you got to keep the ruling classes guessing. Okay? So they're saying this effort is leaderless. Well, when it's leaderless, according to their definition, it cannot be stereotyped. It's hard to figure out. It can't be decapitated, can it? So keep increasing your numbers, increasing your locales around the country. It's like a building of democracy. You don't want to move out when just the foundation is built or a few doors are in place. You want to keep building 100,000, 500,000, 2 million, 10 million. Keep building it. Every community. So there's an Occupy movement in every city, town, village, farmland in America, all linked, and all pursuing fair play, pursuing justice, pursuing decentralized power, pursuing what the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag ends with, which ought to get great emphasis, right? With liberty and justice for all, not liberty and justice for a few. The more these occupying efforts focus on the buildings containing the oppressors, the more important it is. You surrounded the insidious Chamber of Commerce a little while ago. That's the incubator for more corporate crimes, more corporate welfare, more corporate fraud, and more corporate control on our government. That's the seedbed of the corporate state. The corporate state that Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1938 called fascism. Let's call it what it is. He said in a message to Congress, 1938, he said, when government's controlled by private economic power, that's fascism. Those were his words, not a paraphrase. So I would suggest some other buildings. They're both corporate buildings and government buildings. See this here? Department of Commerce, right? Right? Oh, over there. Yeah. Well, the Department of Commerce doesn't represent one half of commerce, which are the consumers, right? The homeowners, the tenants, the people who are drowning in debt. And whoever built the Department of Commerce, where you only have one equation in the marketplace, the sellers, the vendors, Then go to the American Chemical Society building. They got a nice building here in Washington. Go over to the National Association of Broadcasters, who are using our public airways free and deciding who says what 24 hours a day and who doesn't say what 24 hours a day. That's up near DuPont Circle. Develop a whole map so you can plant the Occupy movement and take back the flag and take back the Constitution and take back the rule of law to apply to those lawbreakers. It's interesting how they define lawbreaking. You violate a traffic ordinance, or you don't pay enough in the meter, that's breaking the law. But when you break the people's bank, when you break the people's government, when you break the laws of the land that are supposed to apply to corporations, that's just business as usual. So focus the law-breaking charge on them. They break the law to contaminate, toxify the air you breathe, the water you drink, the food you ate. They break the law and toxify the taxes you send to Washington to bail them out, and subsidies, handouts, giveaways, bailouts. They break the law for the military-industrial complex, the thievery of the military contractors, a corporate crime wave that is now in the tens of billions of dollars of your taxpayers. They break the law when they push a willing government to engage in criminal laws of aggression overseas, unconstitutional laws, illegal laws, laws that break the Geneva Convention, laws that are boomeranging and will boomerang against our own national security. The rule of law, the rule of international law is shattered. Yes. Hold them to those standards. Bravo. In 2008, exactly 3 years ago, October, we had a major rally in Wall Street. That's when Wall Street was crashing. Thought it was pretty good. Focus on Wall Street. We filled that space with that big flag that is draping the New York Stock Exchange, who inside that building, they've defiled and desecrated that flag. They don't represent America, those big corporations. They'll go anywhere in the world where they can get a better deal of serf labor and criminal governments that can be bribed. And we filled, this is a DVD, we filled that area, and nobody reported it except the New York Times, deep into the newspaper. They weren't listening. They weren't listening then. They were all saying, how are we going to keep the banks from taking us over the cliff on the backs of the taxpayer? Well, 3 years later, they're starting to listen, aren't they? Huh? Indeed, I just heard that Chase Manhattan Bank just gave the New York City police force $4.5 million. I wonder why. Huh? So, this is what we have to conclude on. One, watch out. Do not be co-opted. Do not be co-opted by institutions that should have been leading us but are now trying to take this effort over. Yeah. When you got these big unions who cowered before corporate power, who didn't stand up against globalization, who didn't slam Congress hard for being a government of the Exxons by the General Motors for the DuPonts, they're all there now up in New York. Watch out for co-optation. Watch out for these organizations who are drawing energy from you so they can suck the energy out of you. The second is, they say you have no platform, you have no program. Well, there's one focus you should start out with, and that is a multi-$100 billion taxation of Wall Street speculation. The very idea that you back home go to a store and buy the necessities of life and have to pay a 6% sales tax, a 7% sales tax, an 8% sales tax. But Monday morning, some guy in Wall Street can put in a purchase order for $100 million of ExxonMobil derivatives and doesn't pay a penny in sales tax. But 0.5% sales tax, the economists tell us, can produce over $300 billion with a B dollars a year to be given back to rebuilding our country and creating good-paying jobs that cannot be exported. The final focus of the effort, let's face it, a lot of the things we want to occur in this country has to go through Congress. Congress is experiencing serious bouts of institutional insanity. You have large numbers of members of Congress who are in a bubble. They're in a total bubble down there. They're in a total bubble. They're actually, in the last few weeks, they're voting to weaken the food budget, safety budget. We just had 21 Americans die from contaminated cantaloupes from Colorado. They're voting to weaken Social Security. They want to vote to corporatize Medicare. They're voting to weaken the environmental laws. They're voting to give more tax breaks to the corporate crooks. I mean, these are supposed to be the representatives of the people. The best thing you can say about them, other than they're being bought and sold in a 24-hour cycle, is they are institutionally insane. And there are a few of them that are okay, but they're in the minority. But in their totality, let's look at it. There are 535 men and women down there who put their shoes on every day, like you and I. Each one of them represents about 650,000 men, women, and children back in their district. I put the represent in quotes. Now, 1,500 or so corporations pretty much get their way with 535 men and women on Capitol Hill. And they don't have a single vote. They have money, they have power, they don't have a single vote. We're the ones that have the vote. We got to connect the vote with the edifice of justice, with the edifice of productivity for the workers, with the edifice of retirement security, with the edifice of voice, with the edifice of clean elections, with the evidence of community self-reliance and community economies, with the evidence of converting to renewable energy. All of these and many more that you're championing have to go through, one way or another, through Congress. There are certain things that can be started from A to Z at the community level, and we all know that. Farmer markets, for example. Community health clinics, for example. Turning the social media into an action media, not just an informative media, etc. However, eventually, your demonstration should surround the local office of your representatives and senators back home. A cordon of justice. Now put yourself into these buildings, and what do you think they're saying to themselves when they're seeing you? All these people in these Wall Street offices are looking out, and they're seeing the people. Maybe they're sweating a bit, huh? Maybe they now know the American people are exhibiting a pulse. They're not going to take it anymore, huh? Maybe some of them are going to join you. They're going to be whistleblowers. Maybe some of them are going to start fighting the good fight inside these organizations because you've given them the backbone. You've given them the courage. You've given them the evidence. I read the Washington Post yesterday. Can you believe the Washington Post columnist actually came here? So her name is Petula Clark. And Petula Dvorak. Look what she said. It's quite interesting. She's talking about you. She said, as she came closer and closer to Freedom Square, she said the following. But today, the cabbie and a few other cabbies parked and watched, nodding in support. Every Washingtonian I talked to who stepped out to watch the action in Freedom Plaza, from the security guards to the suits, felt a solidarity with the message. And then she quotes one security guard, quote, the banks, he said, are taking us all for a ride.
Yep.
And these people who showed up, they're in the right place now because Congress is behind the banks.
Yeah.
End quote. Okay? Now, you know you're going to succeed when the main item of conversation among the plutocrats and the oligarchs is the question, who is going to guard the guards when they join you? Thank you very much.